You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. Welcome to The Voluntary Life. This is an episode about mental uncluttering. I wanted to talk more about ways of freeing your mind. This is something that I'm really interested in and have been looking at for a long time. And I've found some techniques very helpful, such as getting things done, the GTD approach that I've talked about in previous podcasts. And I've also mashed together different techniques and come up with some ideas that work for me. And so what I wanted to do was to share with you some of these ideas, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about them too. So this week I'd like to talk about uncluttering your mind. One of the things that I find most helpful in freeing my own mind is just clearing my head, being able to get rid of baggage and clutter inside my own mind. You know, the more things that I'm trying to remember and trying to think about and haven't resolved inside my own head, the harder it is for me to be creative and to really live life to the fullest and enjoy the opportunity of my own imagination, my own creativity, and the ability to think, really. So I'm a huge fan of mental decluttering, and I find that when I do clear my head, I am ready for anything, and I have peace of mind, and I can think a lot faster, and I'm able to have ideas rather than try and hold loads of ideas in my head. When I haven't got a clear mind, I can't do those things. So I use a number of habits and techniques or rituals or whatever you want to call them to help in this process of uncluttering my own mind so I can think freely. And that's what I'm going to share with you this week. I basically got three methods of doing this, or three aspects of doing this. The first is controlling the information that comes into my head. For me, that is really about being on an information diet. You know, in the same way, if you want to be healthy physically, you look at your diet and you think about what you're consuming and whether or not the diet that you have is nutritious and you have lots of good stuff that's going to support your body. For me, I think it's exactly the same with your mind. And so I try to be aware of the information that I consume, and I try not to consume useless junk information in the same way as I try not to eat junk. And what that means for me is I have very little to do with television or the mainstream media or the news or any of the drama of current events that I have zero control over. This is something that I've really changed my approach to over the years. I used to be a news junkie. I used to love finding out what was going on in the world, and I'd follow the news very closely, and I'd try and keep myself informed about it and understand, you know, world events, because I figured that's part of being a well-rounded person and being an educated person, really, you know, understanding the world that I live in and so forth. And then I came to realize that most of the information that we all get from the news and television and the mainstream media is just rubbish. You know, it's like junk food for the brain. It's typically stories about things that are going to give you a fight or flight response, that you're going to think, oh my God, the world is about to end. What am I going to do? But typically stuff that you can't really do anything about. So this is my first step to uncluttering my own mind, is not to put junk in. And rather than watch TV or read the news, you know, I try to choose more interesting and fundamental things to read that tell me about the world that I live in more deeply, without getting involved in the day-to-day drama, which typically focuses on whatever is, you know, most dramatic, which is not necessarily the same as most important. And you can think about, you know, your media diet also in terms of your email. This is something that I could definitely improve myself, is looking at what I am subscribed to on email And frankly, I should be unsubscribing to more of the things that come into my inbox, because I know that I'm still getting emails for stuff that frankly is more noise than useful signal for me. So there's another place to look at your media diet, is controlling what actually comes into your inbox in the first place. So the next thing that works for me in terms of decluttering my own mind is having a trusted system for how I take in information, process it, store it, use it on an ongoing basis in my projects and in the things that I'm trying to do in my life. And that's some sort of what I'm going to talk about in more detail in this podcast. But whether or not you adopt any of my techniques, just having a trusted system, I think, is enormously helpful. Whatever works for you, whatever system is going to work for you, it might be completely different. You might be a pen and paper person. You might have a lot of physical filing. You may do things very differently to me. Doesn't matter. If you trust your system, it will really help you to clear your head. And a trusted system is really knowing how you're going to organize the information, either in projects and actions that you can do something about, or as reference material that you can refer to when you need it, or as stuff that you're going to get rid of. And I'll talk a little bit more about that aspect as the podcast goes on. The third key method that I have for uncluttering my mind is to do a weekly review. Now, the weekly review is an idea that comes from getting things done. And the things that I'm talking about today, just in terms of clearing your head, are what David Allen calls part of the clear review. Now, there's other aspects to the weekly review, and I think I will do podcasts about those other aspects in the future. And they're to do with getting current on all your projects and being creative. But this is just one aspect of the weekly review. And what's relevant here is that if you want to unclutter your mind, if you want to free your mind and get rid of all the stuff that is preventing you from being creative, you need to have a system to regularly clear your head. And regularly, for me, means at least weekly. So everything that I'm talking about here is stuff that I do at least on a weekly basis. And it is enormously helpful to do so. It really frees you up. So those are the three things that are really important to me. Controlling the information that I take in through being on a media diet, having a trusted system for what I do with information that I take into my head, and choosing to store it in places outside my head, and thirdly, doing a weekly review to keep my trusted system going. So what is my system? Well, basically, what I do is simply take the concept of inbox zero and apply it to everything that I can in my life. Inbox zero, if you don't know about it, this was a video that Merlin Mann did a few years ago now for Google, and he's supposed to have written a book about it, but I don't think he ever actually did write up this book. But the video is of his talk is great, and essentially the video advocates going for inbox zero on a daily basis on your email. And he talks about the benefits of emptying your inbox and the sort of peace of mind and freedom of mind that it gives you. And I recommend watching that video, especially if you have difficulty getting to inbox zero. It's really worth watching. I'll put a link in the show notes. But it's such a great idea that I think it applies not just to email, but to everything in life. You know, getting to inbox zero whenever there's a bunch of information that starts clogging up your mind is enormously helpful. So just to give you some examples of what that looks like, here are some of the things that I do on a weekly basis to get to inbox zero. The first thing is obvious, just going through mail. I do inbox zero on a daily basis, but if things start getting hectic, I do it at least on a weekly basis at the very bare minimum. And as I say, watch Merlin Mann's video if you want more tips on getting to inbox zero on your email. I find it really helpful to do that. And as part of that process, I also look at the emails that I've sent and received over the last week, and I make sure that if I have contact information from people who I know I'm going to, want to contact in the future, I put that into my contacts database. So I do a weekly check of that. Now, mail is just one digital inbox to get to zero, but I have many other ones. A good example is my downloads folder. This is another place where stuff just can accumulate, and I clear it at least once a week. And it's such a good thing to do. I mean, I actually use my downloads folder a bit like a digital inbox for files that come into my life. The temptation is to put stuff like that on your desktop, on your computer, but actually I prefer using the downloads folder myself because I know that that's stuff that needs to be processed. It needs to be cleared away. So I do that on a weekly basis. I also clear my default notebook in Evernote. So I have like an inbox in Evernote for new things that I've decided to store in Evernote, and I tag those things and put them in the right place and so forth. And there are a couple of other digital inboxes that I also clear on a weekly basis. So these are things like voice memos, a note-taking application I use called Drafts, and anything else which could have accumulated some information over the week, I just clear it. And ultimately, that all goes into my own task management application. And that is the sort of final inbox that I clear. I create actions wherever that is relevant from all of these things that have come into, from all of this information that's come into my life, and I work out what I'm going to do with it. I create an action, and the last inbox I clear is the one in my task or project management system. And once I've done that, all of those digital inboxes are cleared, but they're not the only inboxes in my life. So I also have a series of social inboxes, and you probably have these too. So I'm talking about Facebook messages and Google Plus messages, maybe Skype, maybe you use LinkedIn. And I also go through and make sure that all of those are cleared. And what I mean by that is I've seen everything. I know what I'm doing with it, if I need to respond, or I have decided what to do about that. So those things are also all cleared at least once a week. I also look at my media queue, which for me is either in an app called Instapaper, which you can store for reading later, or it could be in a program called Watch It Later, which I use for things that I want to watch later. And I look at all of the articles that I've accumulated over the week when I've seen something online and thought, I'm going to read that later. And I clear it out of my inbox. Either I'm going to put it in as reference material for a project, which I will look at when I'm doing that project, or I just archive it, or just delete it. And so I know that my media queue is effectively clear once a week. So those are the social inboxes. Then for me, I also have physical inboxes that I want to get to zero. Physical places where things accumulate. And the ones for me where I find stuff accumulating that just takes up mental headspace are places like my wallet. So there'll be receipts and stuff that I've collected that's useful. I take all of that stuff out. I decided what I'm going to do with it. Because I'm paperless, I either scan stuff that I want to keep, or I put the information where it needs to be and then get rid of the paper. And also any physical inboxes. So when I'm in the UK, I actually have a physical inbox. When abroad, it may be that I just use the desk that I'm using for that, or wherever we're at. So I just clear any physical spaces where stuff of mine that I haven't really dealt with has accumulated. So those are all the inboxes that I need to clear to kind of get to inbox zero, not just in my email, but across my life. And that really helps me free my mind. But that's not the only thing that I do to free my mind. The other thing is to actually look at what other stuff is just on my mind and clear my mind of stuff that I haven't really properly thought about but is bothering me. So there's a couple of ways that I do that. One is to do what David Allen calls a core dump, where you literally just write down all the stuff that is on your mind. You just get it all down on paper. Whatever it is, just get it out of your head so that there's nothing else that you know you're thinking about that you haven't written down. And that is an extremely helpful thing to do. I do it at least once a week. And I look at my diary as well while I'm doing it, and look at what happened in the previous week, what I plan to do in the week ahead, and think about anything that could be on my mind. And I also, on a daily basis, I also use a journal. So I find that in a way is almost like a daily core dump as well. But it is not just general stuff that's on my mind. There's also specific things that I write about in that journal, like projects I'm working on, things that I'm thinking about. And I find it very helpful at least once a week to go back over the previous week and reread the journal and look at what I've been writing about, things that have been on my mind. Because sometimes I just completely forget that I've actually had a lot of thoughts about something when I was journaling and written them down. So it's really helpful to go back, and what I do is because I use a digital journal, I actually title each of the journal entries at that point. And I also tag them if that helps, if I find that useful, if they're to do with specific subject areas. And, I basically kind of process them. I read through all the things that I've been thinking about, and that helps me to get these things out of my head so that I can actually think more clearly without sort of just having lots of stuff that is unfinished going on in my mind. So this is what I'm doing on a weekly basis. I'm emptying all of these inboxes, and I'm emptying my own head of stuff that, is just stuff I've been thinking about. And I wanted to say a few more words about how I actually process that information so that I literally do get it out of my head and I'm not just moving stuff around, if you like. And this is something that David Allen talks about in Getting Things Done. And he has a lot of really great tips for how to process information that comes into your life. Here's my take on sort of the most useful things from Getting Things Done and also other places that I've read about this stuff. The first thing that really helps me is writing everything down. I talked about this in regard to the journal and the core dump and so forth. And just writing stuff down is a great first step for getting it out of your head. But writing it down is just the first step because you have to actually decide what to do with the information that you've written down. And in the same way, you have to decide what to do with the contents of each of your inboxes. If you want to empty your email inbox, you've got to decide what to do with each of those emails. So the basic approach is you decide what this thing is, so what your response to this piece of information is. And in general, when you look at a piece of information, it's either that you have an action associated with it, where this is something I need to respond to, I need to maybe reply to this email, or I need to check something, whatever, and a direct action that you can do. Or alternatively, it may be that this piece of information prompts a project for you, not just a single action, but a larger undertaking that is going to involve lots of multiple actions, and that would be a new project for you. Or it may be that what you're looking at is just reference material. It's just useful information that you might want to store in the future. Or alternatively, it could be something that is just rubbish and you can delete it, dump it. It's not relevant, not useful for you at all in the future. So the basic process for clearing your mind and clearing your inboxes is the same. You just go through each of the bits of information and you identify, what is this? Is this an action or a project or reference material, or is it trash? And then if it's an action, you decide, is this something that I can do? And a really useful thing is the 2-minute rule, which is that if you can do it within 2 minutes, it's much better just to get it done rather than having to put it into your project list and task system and all of that. Just get it out of the way. But if you can't do it within 2 minutes, then you decide what to do with this action. And it's either something that you are going to be able to defer until a more appropriate time. So you might put it as an action in a project, in your project list that you're going to look at on a regular basis in as another part of your weekly review. Or it may be something that you can simply delete. And a huge amount of email falls in that category for me, as I'm sure it does for you too. So that's a very, very quick summary of how I clear my own mind. And the most useful tools and techniques that I've found for doing so on a weekly basis, from Getting Things Done and various other places that I've kind of picked up ideas. I would love to hear about your thoughts on how you clear your mind. And I hope that this is useful for you if you're interested in improving the amount of clarity and freedom that you experience by not having little worries in the back of your mind of stuff that you haven't taken care of. This is a great way to just be ready for anything and not be worried about stuff that you haven't thought through. If you're discerning about the kind of information that you let into your life in the first place by, having a media diet, being conscious of what information you want to consume and what information you don't think is helpful to you. And if you have a trusted system where, you have a regular checklist of actions on a weekly basis that you go through just to clear all your inboxes and get everything out of your head. And if you do this on a regular basis, a weekly basis, I'm sure you will experience huge changes in the level of mental freedom that you experience. I certainly did when I really decided to get serious about implementing this part of the weekly review. And something that David Allen once said, which I really took to heart, was that there's a huge difference between almost clear and completely clear. There's a massive difference between having your email inbox with just a few messages left that you haven't dealt with and having an empty inbox. And it feels so good when you get all the way to clearing all your inboxes. It's not a small incremental difference. It's huge, especially if you do it on a regular basis. But let me know what you think. Let me know if you experience the same. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you so much for listening, and I really look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.